So what are we doing today? If you guys join us every Tuesday slash or Thursday, depending on availability, we do developer workshops. So I'm Emily, I do DevRel for Linea, but here to introduce a very special guest. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Henry. I'm one of the co-founders of Privy. We build onboarding tools for the space in Web3.
Okay, awesome. So I guess we just want to cover the different, service areas where you can really create robust dApps on top of Linea. I think lay of the land, we're just going to start off with jumping into your presentation, leave some time for dumb questions for me at the end. So if you're okay with it, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing your screen and let you take it away from here.
That sounds perfect.
Okay. Oh, I love this picture. It's very cute.
Thank you. My goal here is to talk for a little bit about what the state of art looks like in crypto UX and specifically the means of self custody. And I guess broadly, I'm going to try to stay away from the word wallets insofar as I can to talk more specifically about what is a wallet and what do they do, and think about how should users be sort of enabled to interact with on-chain systems and with self-custodial systems generally in the space. So that is what I'm going to take a second to talk about. I think we have a long way to go as an industry, but I think we're seeing a lot of exciting stuff happening in the space. And for that reason, I think there's a lot to be hopeful for in general. So my presentation is going to break down into sort of three parts. First, why does all of this matter? Why should we care about the UX of self-custody? Ultimately, we have, for the last 7 or 8 years, had versions of wallets that users can interact with. Why should we try and think about the form factor of these wallets and how does that impact our space? The second is actually, in order to think through this, what is a wallet? What are the things that we're trying to accomplish with this tool? And then finally, actually drilling into our work and how we think about sort of pushing the UX of wallets forward. So with that, I am going to maybe start off by an introduction of the products that we work on here at Privy. So Privy is an onboarding library. And I think our core goal is to give you one simple kit to onboard all of your users to Web3. And so what really that means is whether your user is a crypto OG and has 15 wallets that they use across a number of providers, or whether they are new to the space and don't know what Web3 is and don't know what a wallet is, we want to help you onboard them, activate them, and get them to the sort of core utility of your application faster, in such a way that for you, a user is a user and you don't have to distinguish how they came in. So very concretely, that means two core parts of the product. The first is third-party connectors. So this is enabling you to actually have users connect with their existing wallets and use these sort of consumer wallets as part of your application without you having to deal with, the RPC calls to, interact with MetaMask and then interact with Coinbase Wallet separately. And then Coinbase Wallet, uses their own protocol versus Wallet Connect, which a lot of other wallets use. And then every now and then you make a call and the connection breaks on mobile and you get stranded in the App Store as a user. So we try to abstract all of that away so you don't have to worry about it. So as a developer, you really can just say, I want my user to connect a wallet. You get a handle into that wallet, and you can then use that to interface with your user self-custody system. The second piece is embedded wallets. And embedded wallets allow you to basically integrate a signing system much more fleshly into your app. So you have this wallet that is not a third-party extension, that is not something where your user has to, go off, download a Chrome extension, store a mnemonic, make sure they've stored it appropriately, uh, and then start interacting with your app. Instead, you have this system that sits on top of your app that can be heavily customized so it looks like it is an integrated part of your product and go from there. Um, Now, the question you might ask is why do both? And I think this is a core part of how we see sort of our mission in the space moving forward. Arguably, serving both types of customers feels extraordinarily distracting. You've got, some of our customers like Shibuya are very Web3 native and are using us to onboard people who usually know about crypto. And some of our customers like Courtyard are not. And Courtyard is a physical cards trading marketplaces. And, most of their customers, users, are Pokemon card traders, people who don't know what Web3 is. So why should we take on both of these customer sets? Like arguably they have very different needs and requirements. And I think this is one of the most important things that we do. The meme is we will onboard the next billion users. And I think our take is that, right now, it takes a bit of genius to really understand how to interact with self-custodial systems. Um, kind of need to, beyond storing your mnemonic, you have to understand, okay, how do I want to have my gas fees sort of interact with it? If the wallet breaks down, you need to potentially manually upgrade your nonce. And I guess our simple take is the current paradigm is absolutely fantastic for promoting control over your assets, but it is likely not the way in which most users will get to know self-custody. Wallets have to become more deeply integrated into apps, so users can start sort of understanding what it means to control your assets online without getting the sort of full Monty up front with a wallet system that gives them infinite configurability. And so that's why partly it's extremely important to do both of these things. Now, the alternate side is to say, well, I have an easy way of building a wallet into my app. I can just give my developer signatures, and the developer can basically just sign things on behalf of users. Now, obviously, that is sort of the reverse and maybe worse offense, which is simply handing over the means of signing things to developers, is not Web3. Part of the core premise of Web3, the two features that I think make the special are self-custody and interoperability. And so the user needs to be in control of those keys, needs to be in control of those wallets in order to build a real product that allows them to take their assets with them wherever they go and make decisions. And so those are sort of the two extremes. And we believe that magic happens at the intersection of the two. Specifically, when you build a native app, an app that, if you took out decentralized rails, would be very, very different. But you build it for mainstream users, for users who are not coming in because they want to use crypto per se, but for users who want to come in because they want to use your app, because they think your product is cool. And basically, at the end of the day, this is kind of our vision for why this matters is the crypto space today is hyper financialized. And it makes sense. The UX of most crypto apps is so bad that if you weren't making money in exchange for using the app, you probably wouldn't put up with the pain. And I think our take is by improving the UX of these self-custodial systems, we can sort of open up the aperture of what are viable products in the space by basically, reducing the size of the stick that users are getting beat with. We can also reduce the size of the carrot. So instead of like having to immediately make money, financialization can take a bit more of a backseat. Now, there's nothing wrong with financialization, but it makes sense to us that DeFi today has probably the most product market fit in the space. And that, I think, is because of the form factor that a lot of wallets have. So this is kind of our thesis and why we exist, which is to say signatures are core to user-owned internet. And without improving wallet UX, really there are two outcomes, which is either crypto remains only financial as a space, which again is a fine outcome, but hopefully it can be more than that. Or crypto ceases to be user-centric, and basically we give up on self-custody because it proves to be too hard to use for mainstream users. So with that, I'm going to try to actually talk about, what can we do about this? How do we go about improving UX in the space concretely? I'll start with a little bit of theory about, what is a wallet really and what are we trying to do? And then I'll jump into, very concretely what comes next in the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. So with that, let's draw a map of the cat. I think it makes a lot of sense to try and understand, what is it that we're trying to achieve with this tool, with this wallet. So first off, this is a plug from a post I really, really liked by Gabby Goldberg called Stop Calling It a Wallet. I think a wallet is a few too many things to be a single thing. And here we have examples of, four form factors for a wallet, going from right to left, from the old Bitcoin paper wallets that allowed you to have a send address and a receive address, to, in this case, a hardware wallet and the ledgers, to, the traditional consumer wallet that we all know and love, to what I'm taking as a representation of a smart contract wallet with this on-chain system on the left. And all of these are arguably wallets, but what are they actually trying to do? Let's sort of dive into it, and we'll try and spread sort of the understanding across two fronts. First, on a technical basis, what is a wallet's role? And second, on a user journey basis, what is a user actually doing with a wallet? So technicals first. This is a tweet I really, really liked by David Phelps, who really talks about the fact that wallets have two purposes. The first is to custody funds, and the second is to transact in apps. He talks about how we need separate products to do these two. But I think it's very interesting. You can really think about it as the asset security is really the account system. Where do my assets sit? And I would argue that the best form factor for this is something like a bank vault. You want an extraordinarily sturdy sort of uh, non-configurable machine that is extraordinarily secure and heavy and doesn't allow people to do things with it that they're not authorized to do. The second one is like state updates, transacting. We'll call it the signer. And the signer is maybe something that looks a lot more like a Metro card. It's meant to be something that you can use easily, that you can sort of deal with every day, that doesn't require either a ton of expertise or a ton of work to get functioning. So you can start to see how these are, sometimes opposing functions. And historically, these two functions were managed by the same piece of software, which is really the EOA wallet. And here you've got a ton of examples. And to be very clear, I think consumer wallets are such an interesting point, and today the main dominant point in how people are interacting with self-custody. They are, and they give users a ton of control over how their assets are managed, over how their transactions are done. And I think they're not going away uh, anytime soon, nor should they. I think they are an extraordinarily important part of the ecosystem. However, I think we need to start looking at the spectrum of what can a wallet look like to see if we can grow the space of potential apps that can be built using wallets. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about, as a developer, how would you evaluate a wallet if you were trying to use one for your app? And I argue that there are really five core components. The first is customizability. Can this wallet fit into my app? Can it be customized so its interfaces look like something that makes sense within my product? The second is custody. Who does my user have to trust to use this system? Do they have to trust me, the developer? Do they have to trust the wallet builder? Are they completely self-reliant, or are they dependent on a third party? Can they be censored or can they not? The third is recovery. Are my users protected from mistakes, usually or often their own? Are they protected from anything going wrong or moving out of the usual path that they're moving down on? The fourth is integratability. How much does this wallet force me to rethink the rest of my app? Does it work and fit into my existing user model? And finally, security. Are my users protected from attacks? The internet's a dangerous place. Can they survive somebody going out to get them? And, at the risk of making a simple point, I think there's actually a ton of nuance in saying um, the decision here is not one size fits all. There are trade-offs across these five aspects, and usually basically by choosing to prioritize one, you're trading off uh, quality in another. And I think it's really, really important to be very clear about the threat models here and about the things that we let users trade off and developers trade off. For instance, if we look at the question of recovery versus security, the easiest recovery methods, let's say send an email to the user with their private keys, are really bad for security. This is obviously a straw man, and you should definitely not do that. But if I was like, well, you just downloaded MetaMask, let me send you your mnemonic in an email, it means as soon as you lose access to your email, or if you share your password with anyone, basically your wallet's sort of security model has been entirely compromised and an attacker has access to it from there on. Um, you know, Conversely, uh, customizability versus custody. The more a wallet can be integrated within a product, the more power you give a developer in terms of how to customize wallet flows, and the more trust you end up requiring of the user to that developer. So let's say I want to build a product with a completely integrated wallet that lets me, the developer, define all of the interfaces. Well, it potentially allows me to define interfaces that tell a user you're doing X when in fact they're doing Y. It lets a user say, sign here to show that you love Linea, when in fact what's happening is they are getting rugged by me. And so all of these things are trade-offs basically between crafting a really good user experience and crafting a system that lets the user do everything they want. And I'll give a last example. Imagine I want to build an app whose sole purpose is to enable users to order a burrito. And so this is a one button app where I click and basically a transaction gets put on chain to process my burrito order. Well, it's a really, really good UX for that one purpose. It's a hyper customized app. It is extremely simple, but basically it locks the user into a given pathway. And so this is an example, for example, that we've had with one of our customers called Friendtech. Friendtech is a base app, and so they operate on the base L2, and they basically have abstracted away the notion of networks from their users, which I think leads to a much smoother, simpler UX, whereby users don't have to worry about what networks they want to be on or how they want to price gas fees. They can just interact with the product at face value based on the core product utility. But what it's also meant is a lot of users have sent mainnet ETH to their base app, not knowing that this was a base app. And so they would have their mainnet ETH stuck securely in an embedded wallet, but in one where it's kind of a black box that you don't get to peer into within the front of the app. And so, I think our core thesis has been there are going to be trade-offs across these. We have to walk the line between those trade-offs and pick secure points along parts of the trade-off space that different apps would want to have and that different users would want to have amongst their life cycle. But then we have to give users escape hatches. For moments in which the trade-off space doesn't make sense anymore, for that moment in which you've locked your mainnet ETH in a network-specific sort of instance of a wallet, you need to have a way to pop that wallet out, for example, to go back to MetaMask or Phantom and actually export your mainnet ETH back to you. So this is a lot of how we build, basically, is trying to understand what are the different shapes of products that have a need for self-custody, and what are the types of trade-offs that we want to enable these developers to make so they can build the right experience for them. And I think what we've learned over time is that not only is our wallets not one size fits all on a per app basis, but they're also not one size fits all on a per user basis, meaning a wallet has to deeply integrate into your app. It has to be fluid and interact not just with the type of app that you're building, where, for example, a DeFi app is going to have very different requirements from a social app. But it has to also accompany the user and evolve with the user in their journey. As a user gets started, maybe has no assets, they'll have very different needs from a wallet, and they'll value, say, friction and custody very differently than as they move through their journey and start having a lot more assets, where, for example, they might be willing to deal with a lot more friction in exchange for having a much better security model. Here, I think it's worth talking about the fact that this trade-off space is continually improving. So the reality is, we're not stuck with the same primitives, and we don't have to sort of fight the same fights around the trade-offs that we want to make, because the actual trade-off landscape is improving. And little by little, as developers, we're able to get more and give up less. And specifically, I think here account abstraction plays a huge part in the developments in the space. So in traditional, just to take a quick second to talk about what account abstraction is. In traditional Ethereum EOAs, signers and accounts are conjoined. And so specifically what that means is that, the private key that allows you to make signatures with your wallet system is basically tightly coupled with the public key from which your Ethereum address is derived. And so in a sense, you can't split them apart. If you lose your private key, you lose access to your account altogether. And if you give someone the account, you've kind of signaled that this is the only private key you'll ever get to use for it. So it makes for a simple system, but this sort of hard joining also creates a lack of flexibility in terms of how we want to handle, user management of self-custodial tools, user management of keys and accounts. And so what account abstraction is, it's a very basic idea, which is, can we split these two parts of a wallet? Can we split the signer from the account? And so if we, think back to the slide I had 20 slides ago around the wallet's two roles, what we're saying is maybe it doesn't have to be monolithic in this way. Maybe account abstraction can play a role in saying maybe your account itself is a bank vault, but your signer, the way you interact with the account, is a Metro card. And maybe, you have a credit card that's loaded up with $50 for everyday transactions, and maybe you have a Metro card that's loaded up with $2,000 for, and so on and so forth. And so this is us starting to have a lot more flexibility in the system. I would draw the analogy farther in saying, if traditional EOAs are this entire block, it's, the wooden block and the cubes that you put into it. Maybe the mental image that I have is actually, you can think of the wooden block, the sort of major hefty piece, as a smart contract account. And the little sort of wooden inserts that you use to interact with the smart contract account are signers. And so really by separating AA by separating the signer from the account allows you to have a much more flexible app where, if we take the smiley face to be an app, historically, you had to sort of attach the entire block to your app. You had to attach the major EOA, the full wallet, to your app in order to have your user interact with on-chain systems. So, on the one hand, it's very powerful, but on the other, it means that your user is spending, upwards of 50% of their time in your app on some third-party tool. They're spending that time in MetaMask or elsewhere in a place that you don't control at all. Whereas by actually moving the majority of the account system on chain, the wooden block, you basically just have to worry about the signer system itself, which can be a lot more flexible because we've got a few of these. So it can be, maybe for a DeFi app, it's going to be the green block. Maybe for a consumer app, it's going to be the blue star. Maybe for a DeFi app, it's going to be the red triangle. But the point is, signers can be a lot more flexible, and yet they can still talk back to the main account system that's on chain. And that's really what AA is. In a sense, AA takes the account, puts it on chain, and gives you a lot of flexibility over what is the signer that can take actions on behalf of the account. Um, maybe here, I'll also say that this is where the whole MPC versus AA debate is very overblown. Why not both? At the end of the day, even with account abstraction systems, users still need to be able to control keys. So you still have a need for sort of a real world person to interact with cryptographic material. And this is where MPC can do a lot of good by enabling, for example, an email to control a set of keys for a user. So this is how we think about signers, and yet abstract away the entire account system. So my take is we probably want to do both. And to that end, Privy's own embedded wallets actually have been designed so they can be either EOAs, which is how a lot of people use them today, or signers. And here we have integrations with folks like ZeroDev, like Biconomy, like Alchemy, where Privy integrates really, really well with their smart contract account systems as a signer that you can integrate into your app so your users can interact with on-chain systems really, really easily. Awesome. So I'm going to take a pause and, arguably we're done, right? We have these great standards. Account abstraction is becoming a reality thanks to things like 4337, which is a standard for promoting sort of account abstraction systems. But obviously, no, right? We have a really promising technical path to bridging this UX gap. But one, standards take time to develop. And so sort of having the theory and even having the spec, to the spec having sort of full blown out compatibility and support across the space takes some time. And second, we still need to bridge the UX gap. It's one thing to say we can theoretically do this, but it's another altogether to actually build interfaces that users can touch that allow them to interact with these systems. And so, I'll take an example here. One of the most exciting features of account abstraction systems to me is session keys. The idea that you would basically be able to instantiate sort of permission scoped keys for a given application to say, I want to spend, say, up to $50 a month on Henry's app. And then basically Henry's app can spend that $50 however they want. And so it helps bridge the gap between user trust and developer control really compellingly. And I think that's a very powerful idea. But I think the reality is that you still need someone to actually build out that interface. How do I visualize $50 for, per month for Henry's app? What does that screen look like? And if Henry's app tries to do something untoward, how do I go and revoke that session key? These are a lot of like end-to-end UX experiences that need to be answered. And I think this is a lot of what we try to do here at Privy, is to take these sort of technical primitives and these technical ideas and actually build them into something that developers and users can interact with. And so with that, I'm going to move on to the second part of how we skin the cat, which is let's talk about the user journey. How does a user actually interact with these signing systems? So, maybe the UX 101 is, good UX, I think, is about guiding your user. It's about letting them know, how do they get here? Why are they here now? And what should they do? And where do we want them to go? And again, I think maybe the leitmotif is it's really hard to guide a user when you don't control the core interface with which they're interacting with your system. When they're using a third-party EOA or consumer wallet, it's very hard to tell them, well, you're here because you were on this page prior, and actually you should really be clicking this button. And so that is in a sense why, part of the issue with EOAs today is they're very blunt instruments, and we can help contextualize user journeys. And I think that's the core part of what we have to do in building embedded wallets today. And so with that, I'll just summarize by saying the core user interactions that a user has with wallets today are really four. It is wallet creation and recovery. How do I set up this self-custodial system in the first place? It is funding. How do I get assets on it so I can actually, transact and basically pay for things on chain? It is the action of transacting and signing. How do I get permission basically for the state change? And then finally is this question of export or interop. How does this wallet actually work across systems? And how can I escape the given app that spawned it if it's no longer doing what I need it to do? So with that, let's dig a little bit into the concrete parts of UX, and then we'll be good. So I am going to take a second to talk about embedded wallet creation. And here, actually, I had a primer on exactly how embedded wallets work, but I'll summarize over it quickly and skip over a few slides. But what I'm trying to illustrate with this sort of journey through creation is to kind of show, as a builder, here are all the trade-offs that we're being asked to make on behalf of developers, on behalf of users, and here's how we at Privy think about making these trade-offs very concretely to help shape UX, but in a way that neither sacrifices the user's experience nor sacrifices, I think, the parts of self-custody and of security that make Web3 special. And I think trying to toe that line is the incredibly important and tricky part of building these systems. So to give the quick summary, embedded wallets for Privy work off of a Shamir secret sharing based system. We looked at a number of potential implementation paths, and we basically determined it's extremely important that we build a system that is future proof, that allows us to be that allows it to be upgraded over time, but that also relies on sort of tried and true primitives. This is why we picked Shamir secret sharing. It's an algorithm from the 1970s that is sort of highly flexible, gives us a lot of the properties that we want, but has also been in production for 50 years, and has a number of really good libraries and a lot of support for it. It remains very simple, and so that was a lot of how we sort of navigated that choice. At a high level, everything in Privy happens within an isolated iframe, and so the point here is to say key reconstitution, the wallet coming back together, only ever happens in a controlled, isolated environment. And then basically what Privy is doing is it is helping architect and structure the key splitting that happens so that no one but the user ever has access to the core key. So very concretely, this is the user, this is the user's app. The app will spawn an iframe in which a key will be generated. And then immediately upon generation, the key will be split into 3 shards. There is a device shard that is going to stay in the user's client, and there is an auth shard that Privy will manage on behalf of the user associated to the user's identifier. So associated, for example, to their email address. Now, obviously, there's a question here about how do they recover wallets? How does the user recover wallets across devices? And we'll put that aside for now. In most interactions, the user is basically being asked to sign something. And so what will happen is the app will ask the user for a signature. And if the user approves it, we will basically reconstitute the key in the isolated environment by putting together the device shard and the auth shard in this environment, signing, and then destroying the key again. So now, obviously, if the user wants to move to this new device, there is no device shard there. And this is a 2 of 3 system. So the user can't just use the auth shard to sign anything. The auth shard on its own is useless. And so here we have a recovery shard. And there are a few ways, and I'll get into that Privy helps you manage the recovery shard. But basically, the point of the recovery shard is that when you're joining a new device, you can basically use the auth shard and the recovery shard to recreate the key and then resplit it again with a new set of device shards, auth shards, and so on. And so what Privy does is Privy manages the entire bookkeeping for these key shards in such a way that, again, only the user ever has access to keys, and they're only ever managed and reconstituted in this isolated, secure environment. So, the way we started this was now thinking about the user journey. How do we deal with this recovery shard, right? Privy's holding this one, and the user is holding this one. What about the third one, which is really, really essential to having good recovery? So to start, our first version, M1, we'll call it, was basically recovery is secured by user entropy. When a user logs in, they have to enter a password, and we'll use that password to basically generate a symmetric key that is used to encrypt the recovery shard. And thereafter, Privy can basically store that recovery shard on behalf of the user for convenience, but Privy never has access to the actual underlying recovery shard because it's been encrypted with strong encryption set by the user. So that's great. But you might say, man, I really need my users to have wallets be recoverable without dependence on a third party here because Privy is storing that recovery shard on behalf of my user. If Privy, goes down for an instant, then my user can't recover their wallet. And these are extremely time-sensitive things. And so I need to have support for the system without Privy. And so this is where, we can look at M2. This is a system we've designed where actually the recovery shard can instead be stored by the user. So instead of the user encrypting and Privy storing the recovery shard on their behalf, we can have the user encrypt and store their own recovery shard using something like iCloud, Google Drive, or even passkeys. And this is, I think, again, back to the theme of these trade-offs obviously having to connect your iCloud in order to your account, in order to store your own recovery shard is a lot of friction. Passkeys makes this easier. And again, we have this sort of theme as we move forward, we have more and more technical primitives to improve the UX with sort of improved as well benefits in terms of the guarantees that we're making. In this case, this means that if Privy goes down because the user is storing their own recovery shard, the user can actually reconstitute their own key without needing Privy. All they have to do is connect, say, their iCloud where their recovery shard is stored with their device, and they're good to go. But now you might say, man, my users are logging into a social app. At first, their wallets are going to be completely empty. I want them to have zero friction. Moving across devices, having to connect iCloud, even having to enter a password is too much work. And so here, what we've done is we've built an M0 that basically has a symmetric key be generated on behalf of the user in a third-party secure environment, keyed to that user's auth. So, your user signs in with email. We actually pass the proof that this is the user who signed in with this email. And we say, can you please generate a unique password for that user that only the user should have access to? And we use that to encrypt the key itself. And so what it means is the user is now able to recover their wallet across different apps without having to enter a password, because the password is sort of auto-generated from the email that they signed in with. However, it means that you're trusting Privy to do this correctly. So you're sort of improving UX, but you're giving up something in return. And I think this is back to really our point is wallets are not one size fits all, trade-offs abound. And this is part of why, again, we've built with full connectors at the end of the day is for some users, this may not be enough. And people will just want to connect their own wallets. And I think the point of Privy is to give you a single tool set as a developer, which allows you to sort of walk the spectrum, not only for your app, but for individual users so that the wallet can morph as the user experience in your app morphs. And I think our job is to really pick points along this line that makes sense from a security and UX standpoint so that your user has a good experience. This was only one of the four big types. Obviously, funding and questions of gas sponsorship, paymasters, as well as fiat on-ramps are really, really important. The UX of transactions and signing, and there's a lot of security questions here, as well as export and interop, are all parts of this journey that we have to think through for users. And, I guess I'd invite you to check out our blog where we do a lot of work thinking through this and talking through this as we build out these systems. I'll end by just saying, there's a lot, I think, to be excited about. The UX of self-custody is improving by the day. And I think embedded wallets have a role to play there. And I think, I see a future in which basically there's a co-evolution of wallets that sit within apps and wallets that exist for the user themselves. I think as we work, better technology and better primitives will unlock novel UX at a lesser cost, which is something to be really excited about. And generally, I think it's really important that wallets be fluid so that we can build better UX and ultimately spawn new types of consumer products that weren't possible to be built in Web3 today. As a developer, I would really try and focus on your end-to-end journey. What is the user journey from sign up to the first moment in which they experience something novel in your app? How quickly can you get them there? And then generally, what are the touch points in which they're dealing with on-chain systems? And I think as you think through these things, the shape of the experience that you want them to have should become a little bit clearer. And through all of it, obviously, you should think about the quality of the onboarding, the orientation that you give your users, and the defaults that you build for. That is a lot of our thinking that's driving our work generally. And if you're thinking about building a product for consumers, we would love to help you get your users to your product's value faster. Thank you.
Wow, amazing. That was super helpful. I feel like you brought up a lot of points that kind of changed the way I thought about and view wallets. So thank you for that. I do want to kind of bring the conversation back to the dumbest level for people who might not know. Maybe from a perspective of, I'm not too familiar with the wallet space in general. The first piece is do you have a demo of Privy in action or what it looks like for actual UX perspective?
Yeah, for sure. Should I share my screen again?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let me do that. So I can share a few things. So we've built this this basically like workspace, and we like the idea of this sort of blank canvas here, because the point is this is meant to be your app. And so if you want a simple demo of Privy in action, this is one of the customers I mentioned earlier, Courtyard. They're building a two-sided marketplace. So let me log out real quick. But as soon as I log out, you can sort of see that. Here we go. I just need to be able to click a button. You can see this is Privy in action. So this is actually a Privy modal that's been customized to Courtyard. Obviously, you can do more customizability, and it allows you to sign up with an email or a Google account. As you do, a wallet gets generated for you, an embedded wallet gets generated with you for you under the hood. In this case, you can see that this uses one of the systems that I talked about in the presentation. And then from here, obviously, I can go to my settings. I can link an existing MetaMask to my system. For example, if I've already got funds in MetaMask and I want to just use these to fund my embedded account, I can associate my MetaMask to my wallet and potentially transfer funds between them. And then I can go to Courtyard and I can try and purchase an asset. And what they've done is they've basically built an integration between Privy and a credit card on-ramp powered by Third Web. And from there, they do gas sponsorship so that as you spend in order to do this, you don't basically have to pay for your own gas fees. And so this is an entirely self-custodial system that from a UX perspective looks a lot like a traditional web app, which is very exciting. Going back to Privy, this tool is meant to be hyper flexible. It's meant to be sort of one that you can shape for your users' needs. So, here I'll show off maybe just a few things, but obviously I can turn on or off a number of social integrations, and, phone or email. I can, in this case, I'm going to log in with my phone number and create an embedded wallet behind the scenes. So let me get my text, 920143. As soon as I get this text, 853260. As soon as I get this text, I'm able to sign in. My wallet gets created for me under the hood. And what you can see is sort of this user object updating. And so from here, I can, prompt my user to sign a message in app. I can have them link, a third-party wallet if they want to, where, I'll be able to, in this case, say connect my MetaMask again. And this is basically just going to update my user account under the hood, where, my user was formerly a user that just had a phone number and an associated embedded wallet here, OX862. But now they've also got a MetaMask attached. And so I can, as a developer, ask my user, I actually want you to take an action with your MetaMask. Would you sign this message for me? And obviously the user is free to say yes or no. Likewise, my user object is completely flexible. So if the user came in a phone number, but actually I'm a little bit worried about some of the risks of having my user log in a phone number, I can have them sign in with a Google account on top of it, and I can maybe disable the phone number. So that now my user is a Google user. And if they log out and they try to log back in, they have to log back in with Google to get their wallets. But this is a very flexible system that's meant to evolve with the user's needs through the app. So now I'm back having signed in with Google. And again, I can sign messages here. And maybe this still isn't enough, and I want to have my user, set a recovery password to secure their account. So these are all like versions of things that we enable the developer to do. And a lot of our work day-to-day at Privy is really working with customers to kind of understand what is the user journey that you have, and at what moments do you basically want to introduce these elements to create a better user journey for your users.
Awesome. Wow. Okay. I think having that visual of Privy makes it
That's probably
very.
where I should have started.
Yeah. That's totally okay. I think I also have a tendency to want to just jump into the I guess, what do you call it? The reasoning behind everything. Again, taking a step back, for those of, I guess, the audience who don't know, what is an embedded wallet? I think we've had a few people come on talk about account abstraction and smart contract wallets, but it's different, right? We hear about embedded wallets, we hear about MPC wallets. I think you briefly mentioned about the comparison that's overblown. But let's start with the basic building blocks. What is an embedded wallet?
Yes. And, the reality is this is such a fast moving space that if you ask 8 people for their definition, it's going to differ a little bit. But I think it's at this point become enough of a standard that basically the idea of an embedded wallet is, instead of having a wallet. So what is a wallet? A wallet is really a way for a user to manage their keys. Um, and so I would argue that a wallet, the way I would have it is a wallet is a way to manage keys, and an account is a way to have those keys act on assets. And so this is kind of what the separation between an account abstraction. I think the wallet is really about signing. An embedded wallet is the idea that instead of having to have the wallet be a third party piece of software like MetaMask, or even a third party piece of hardware like Ledger that a user brings with them into every app, we can actually have these wallets embed within the apps themselves so that they are sitting flush with the application. So an embedded wallet is basically a key management and key signature system that sits within the app that you're using so that the experience of actually interacting with on-chain systems becomes a lot more seamless. It's part of the app experience as opposed to being this sort of layer that's bolted onto it.
Cool. And then can you explain why there is this comparison? I don't feud feels like too intense, but the conversation surrounding, like account abstraction, smart contract wallets and MPC wallets, right? Clearly, as you mentioned, you're working with Biconomy, uh, so there's a space for the two, but
Yeah, I think, I mean, first maybe it's crypto Twitter loves a good feud, and I think
yeah.
generally, people really care about these systems, and so people get very passionate and sometimes defensive about them, and I think a lot of it makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of it comes down to bad naming as well. I think the reality is being able to speak a little bit more clearly about what part of the system that you want to talk about makes a lot more sense. Uh, but the initial debate, so MPC is basically a set. I mean, MPC typically refers to threshold signature schemes and the ability to basically have distributed parties sign something together. Um, Shamir secret sharing is like a slightly different version of this, where instead of the different parties signing something together, the different parties are actually custodying shards of keys together that they reconstitute. So there are a few different properties here, but I'll bundle them together for the sake of this conversation. Um, Basically, MPC wallets are this idea that uh, everything should turn around the notion of a key, but the key doesn't have to be owned by a single party. And one way of having better key management is to decentralize the way keys are managed. Whereas account abstraction is, I think, sort of broader orthogonal idea of can we split an account from the keys that sign for it? And so I think historically a lot of questions around key recovery and sort of social recovery and so on, like, what are the great issues that wallets have today? People lose their mnemonics, they're hard to use. It's hard to recover from them and so on. And MPC solves a lot of these issues. And I think AA also solves a lot of these issues by building a lot more flexibility around maybe it's not so bad if you lose your keys, because maybe you can set up other keys with this account that's on chain. And so I think that was part of the feud, was both of these sort of fix similar issues, but they're ultimately very different systems. And the way I would say it is AA is kind of a hammer. It's an extraordinarily powerful idea that allows you to do a number of things. And MPC is kind of a scalpel. It is really good at a few things and much more efficient at a few things, because AA can be expensive. Running on chain actions can be super, super pricey. Having to deal with sort of coordination across networks is really hard. And so actually, I think my take is uh, mixing and matching the two approaches, having uh, sort of distributed types of solutions like MPC or Shamir secret sharing uh, for signers and for managing keys on behalf of users is extremely important and is a better solution for the most part. And then I think having AA and having accounts be abstracted away from the end key is probably the way the world is going. And so I think the feud early on was kind of uh, trying to conflate many objectives together in a way where not to pick between the two in a way that we don't.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really want to capitalize on your wallet experience here. I don't know if this relates at all, but we have a question from the audience. Not entirely sure what he means here, but like what technical I get yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call Privy a DApp, but maybe.
Well, I can take this one of two ways and I'll let you pick. I can talk about some of the challenges our customers face, and I can talk about some of the challenges that we face as an infrastructure builder, whatever
Uh,
you prefer.
I'm curious how Privy. Oh, I mean, can I say both?
All right. So I'll start off with ours. Um, so I think decentralization is yet another word. When we talk about conflating things, I think decentralization, custody, security. All of these things are usually conflated when in fact they're uh, either somewhat aligned or completely orthogonal or even sometimes opposed. And so I'll give you an example of a technical challenge as it comes to decentralization. So today Privy orchestrates a lot of the key management that goes behind sort of the embedded wallet software. And I think our goal is to make sure that Privy cannot take, nor can the developers we serve, any actions on behalf of the user. The user has to be the sole party who can control their wallets. Now, we have taken a decision that today splitting these keys amongst dozens of parties actually adds more friction than it benefits us. We think that basically the cost in terms of latency on any given signature uh, is not worth the advantages in terms of trust, and actually having a simple trust model with fewer parties that we probably can be a little bit more forceful with as a sort of, in this case, architect that's working on behalf of the user has more advantages. So I'll give you two sort of key technical challenges, having sort of given our lay of the land. The first, obviously, is questions of latency. If say we try to basically build not a 2 of 3 split, but a 15 of 18 split with multiple parties having to coordinate in order to do key reconstitution, that would be a more decentralized version of the architecture that we have today. And again, one of the great things about the way we've built it is we can experiment in these ways. We can try different things. But what it would probably lead is you have to have these nodes that are online, and you probably have to incentivize them to stay online. So now you probably need to build basically a tokenized network to do this, which is what a lot of great people like the folks at Lit are doing, by the way, which I think is very interesting work that we're looking at very closely. I think there's a lot of ways in which we can integrate these systems and work with them. But I think what it leads to, and I don't have any of the recent data, but last I looked at it, is sort of longer transaction signing times in ways. So if now when you want to take an action on Frentech and buy a key, it takes on the order of hundreds of milliseconds or a few seconds to generate a signature and take that action, that is worse UX. So that's one example of a technical challenge. Another is, what if you're using your app, you've signed in with SMS, and you get SIM swapped? Obviously, we as Privy have to do a good job of setting up good defaults, of helping developers build MFA into their systems, and in helping protect users from these occurrences. But some users have come to us and said, "Man, can you freeze my wallet?" And obviously, we cannot. This is all running client side, and as a self-custodial system. So this is less about decentralization and more about custody. But as a self-custodial system, there's actually relatively little we can do. Now, we've been thinking, should we have some version of a kill switch where we can actually say, well, it's very clear that there's a problem here and Hetty's wallet has been compromised. Maybe we can make it that we click this button and now the attacker can't do it. But obviously then the question is, how do we know that this is Hetty asking us to freeze and not an attacker who's trying to DOS Hetty? So these are, again, some of the technical trade-offs that we have to make between questions of, in this case, security and custody. But these are the types of ways in which these trade-offs play out in actuality.
Okay, very cool. Can you also briefly just touch on how like a developer would integrate Privy into their app? Maybe take us to the docs, like where they can find this information.
Yes, absolutely. So let me share my screen again. So we work really hard to make things really, really simple. And I think one of our core goals is to kind of make it easier for people to start prototyping in Web3, start building apps that feel good and that they want to use without necessarily sort of having to become an expert straight away. So, you can come to our docs. We have a really simple place to start, which is our quick start. And here we have a sample repo that you can use to sort of get set up, add a few lines of code, and basically be ready to go. Likewise, we've recently put out actually a starter repo for PWAs if you want to build a mobile app that uses sort of progressive web apps that Frentech has done a really, really good job with. And so we sort of took a page from their book and saw how do we make it even easier to do these sorts of things. But then basically from here, the point is we want to have opinionated defaults. We want to get you going really, really quickly, but we want to give you a lot of flexibility so you can actually customize things farther. So for example, if what you want is to enable users to link, for example, a Google account to their app after they've signed in, we make it very, very simple for you to do that. And so throughout, we want to do this. And the way to really think about Privy is twofold. On the one hand, this embedded wallet system that you can use where you can, generate embedded wallets either on login or after, either with, user passwords required from the start or without. And then there's the external wallets, using Privy basically as a Rainbow Kit sort of stand-in in this case to help users connect wallets. And through all of this, at the end of the day, behind the scenes, what you're getting as a developer is access to a single sort of user management system. And so here I will use this app that we've built as an internal tool. And here you can see basically these are some of the folks who are interacting with my product. And you can kind of try and understand how has a user decided to interface and interact with your system.
Cool. And then I guess for the Linea devs here, when they're deciding to use Privy, is there anything like specific they have to watch out for, or Privy just works out of the box?
No, Privy just works. They just have to set the appropriate network. So we have a few supported networks, and basically when they come in, as they fund an operation, they just have to switch to the appropriate chain. And so in this case, 59144 is the Linea address, and you basically just set that, and from there, basically Privy will send transactions to the appropriate node handlers for Linea.
Okay, awesome. Oh, someone actually has a question about pricing. Someone wants to start
I,
sharing.
I'm here for it. Yeah, so I think our goal is right now we're in a very nascent space. We are very much working to see how can we help more consumer apps get off the ground. So the way pricing work, I guess, to be very concrete, is the first 300 MAUs that you onboard are completely free. And I think the idea for us is let us get you the ability to really prototype, to play around, to build something that you find delightful. And then from there, it's a flat fee per monthly active user. And so it doesn't matter whether your user makes one transaction or 1,000. It doesn't matter whether they sign up with just email or email and all of the social logins in the world. It is basically a flat fee per monthly active user. And so it runs from $100 a month for up to 2,500 MAUs to 300 for up to 10,000. And then typically beyond 10,000 users a month, we work with developers to understand how do we get them predictable pricing over time.
Awesome. Here's another question. I guess more on the AA side. Uh, Expand the attack surface by introducing smart contracts. We're just auditing formal verification. Sit with Privy.
Yes, it's a really good question. So this is where we work with partners. I think the reality is that the UX is so interwoven across different parts of the app, and two places where we've chosen to work with partners rather than build things out ourselves is smart account systems and fiat on ramps. And so to answer your question, Ahmed, the basically, we work very closely with various teams building smart account systems. And so as part of that, we ourselves have prototyped everything. And so I'll actually give you an example here. Let me go back to our docs for 1 second. You can come here and we have an account abstraction section where we sort of show off this is how it works. And so we've actually built example apps with all of these people. We've looked into how their systems work. But ultimately, we can give you sort of pointers and talk through how to pick your smart account system. The full sort of range of auditing and security work there is obviously one that we have as our partner's responsibility. So happy to make connections to any of those teams, but ultimately they're the ones in charge of their own security. And I think you're right to think about how does sort of layering in systems together affect the security posture of my app.
Okay, very cool. So we have 3 minutes left. I'm going to give a 10-second. Oh, wait, no, I actually had the last piece. Is there anything special you wanted to announce, highlight about Privy that's coming up? And then just, I guess, social handles, ways to get connected. Yeah.
Yes. So I have a very boring announcement, but one that I'm extremely excited about, which is a feature that concerns Linea, and that is top-level domain switching. So, a lot of our work is thinking through what new features are brand unlocks for like people building in the space. And so, for example, integrating fiat on-ramps or integrating smart account systems, all of those are like major unlocks. But then there's a number of little things, which is how do we make it that like your application actually feels good to work with? That as a developer, you're having a good time integrating and you can make changes and you can experiment and it's not a like giant headache every time you try and change something. And I think, frankly, that's the issue we've had with a lot of tooling in the space sometimes is it feels very shallow. You can get to step one really easily, but then as you want to move farther, it's a little bit limiting. And so one of the features that we've gotten a ton of requests around is how do we add a top level network? specifically, I think our assumption up front was uh, every time a user makes a transaction, they are probably picking a chain because that's kind of how it works with traditional wallets. And actually, arguably, we're wrong, and we're seeing a lot more apps that are very chain specific. And so, if you have a Linea app, instead of having to pass the Linea chain as a parameter in every transaction, starting this week, you will be able to basically set it as your app default. So again, I get very excited about this stuff because it's a real sort of developer quality of life improvements that I think go a long way. But that is the sort of major announcement. I think beyond that, I will tease the fact that we've got new clients coming, so you can actually build native mobile apps using Privy. Today we have a React SDK, but basically that'll change soon.
Oh, very cool. Always excited about mobile. Okay, what if people want to get connected? Is Twitter, Discord, all that?
We recommend Twitter. Come to privy_io on Twitter, and we would love to chat. And then beyond that, we have a developer Slack that we're excited to talk to you.
Okay. Awesome. Oh, a developer Slack. I have not seen Slack used in quite a
We
while.
are we are we are boomers in the way in which we think about working with
I
folks.
don't know. I don't know. I feel like Slack has a better UX than Discord, so maybe you guys are just keeping core to, your principles.
The
Um,
threading's easier.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely prefer Slack to Discord. Last piece, are you guys gonna be in Istanbul at all for Dev Connect?
Yes, watch out for us there. We're excited to chat, but part of the team will be in Istanbul at that point.
Okay, awesome, cool. So surface touch points to meet you online in IRL. Thank you so much for joining. This was a really interesting talk. I had a great time.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks so much.
Bye.